What if I told you that there exists an anime that during its relatively short run manages to focus on topics such as war, peace, death, trauma, nihilism and meaning in life, cultural precognitions, personal ethics, crimes, comradeship, apocalypse, the post-apocalypse, post-apocalyptic mafia, alcohol, more alcohol, so much more alcohol, trumpets, architecture, tanks, eggplants, dolphins, really thin owls, dubious close-ups of feet, some real-life ghosts, multi-legged, demon slaying, weather reporting, stealth sniper and amazing grace singing, wall climbing, 200mm coil gun firing super tank, and, last but not least, the map of Australia. And, as a main focus, it's a story all about music and the universal power that songs have. And what if I told you that this isn't just a list of my insane delusions, but a real anime called Sound of the Sky, which also quite fittingly manages to reflect its message in an amazing soundtrack, which is perhaps one of the best that an anime has produced, ever, and in my opinion it's up there with the best. But here's the kicker. You're just going to have to take my word on this one, as the best songs in the soundtrack frequently get blocked by the copyright holders, so I have no way of showcasing you any of it on YouTube, and I'm somewhat mad about it. Here's the best snippets I could safely provide from one of my favorite songs. So I guess we're rolling with the scraps left on the floor, so get ready to talk other dumb stuff instead. And most importantly, the anime is not just a military K-on! It's not a military K-on! It's not a goddamn K-on! Sora no Woto takes place in a world after a global calamity that set humanity backwards a technological era. We follow our main character, this heckin' cute, Yui, from K-on! On her quest to become the best military trumpeter in this world that's constantly plagued by cyclical warfare, skirmishes over the scarce resources, and ever-closing in defeat against the elements. But our main character isn't really in a place to comment on any of that, as instead of the front lines, she gets assigned into a backwater village where her role in the military is mostly nominal, and her days are spent taking care of the farmlands, and trying really hard not to pee herself, just like in real military. Let's focus on yet another, somewhat more forgotten key player, namely, this town on the background, that suspiciously looks like this real-life Spanish town. The setting of the series, the rural town of Seas, is based on the Spanish city, Cuenca. The way it's showcased and how it's finely crafted into the setting makes it as important cast member as anyone else in the series. This all being said, I enjoyed the way the setting was built so much, that I actually went and booked a flight all the way to Spain just to do some location scouting. Now, it's pretty easy to point out how faithfully this town was recreated in the anime, and because there exist a lot of comparisons already, let me point you something that you don't find in most other scouting blogs. The fact that in real life there's actually a gigantic mountaintop Jesus standing next to the town, that also glows in the dark. As a side point, in a nearby town, the locals have this festival, where people wear gigantic cowbells and clown jump downhill. If this tradition seems a bit strange, it gets even better when you read how the locals themselves don't really know why they do this at all, as the archives detailing the origin of the festivities were destroyed during the Civil War, but the people still get in their cowbell outfits anyway. I just thought that was interesting. Back to the anime. Now here's an anecdote that I didn't manage to actually fact-check, so if anyone asks, you didn't hear this from me. But based on my vague memories, and the alignment of stars, and how the wind smells sometimes, I remember reading somewhere that the series was produced concepts first, meaning that before coming up with the plot specifics, the studio had already crewed character designs and did some location scouting. This would at least explain why the city itself feels like such a major player in the anime, as the entire plotline would have been structured just to explain why putting anime girls in Spain makes the perfect sense aesthetics-wise. It's also worth noting how hilarious it is that the staff, upon seeing Spain, decided instantly to produce a post-apocalyptic anime. Aside our main character, the cast is composed of others, to varying degrees misfits, who all have highly compelling backstories, explaining, for example, why this rude mongrel is actually, nearly, a likable character, or why weapons of mass destruction are actually pretty cute and based. But because we could easily spend the rest of the video just finely combing through the character beats, let's focus on another important detail: being wasted. Let me introduce you to Calvados. You might wonder why this nominal anime review has now turned into a showcase for French alcohol. But here's the secret: liquor is an essential part of the anime experience. The TV series is pretty roundabout on all this, as, well, you've probably noticed how anime girls tend to get drunk on juice pretty easily, and that's fully because you can't show minors drinking in television, as the Japanese society would, probably, instantly collapse. So the producers bonked their wise heads together, and decided that they'll make an OVA episode that's free of all television censorship rules. And instead of using this special to, for example, build on the actual plotline, they instead used the OVA as a chance to showcase the cast shotgunning entire pints of hard liquor. Which was, of course, objectively the right focus point. The end result is an episode where the characters get progressively more drunk, while fighting in a make-believe war, while also randomly enlisting a local priest, and getting her drunk too, which probably amounts to some degree of heresy. So that's a pretty solid high point in the series. Okay, so just to pretend that we're a real review now. Sora no Woto was a part of an original anime project, Anime no Chikara. Or as some filthy Westerners translate it, the power of anime. In total, 3 anime were produced in the early 2010s, including Sound of the Sky, but also the titles Occult Academy and Night Raid 1931. Based on my fully subjective research vibes, Occult Academy tends to be more well-known from the two, especially because the opening tends to be something alright, but neither of the series seemingly has a similar cult status that Sora no Woto nowadays has. And now we're going to uncover why all these strange internet dwellers think that. The other anime overall ranked much lower on a list of works I'd actually recommend, but in a way, they also have some interesting merits on their own. For example, I previously made an extremely pedantic video on how Kantai Collection is big wussy and a poo-poo head for not actually bothering to showcase what Japan was up to during its edgy imperial period. But Night Raid takes this criticism at face value, and decides to dive balls deep into goddamn Manchurian railway politics. So that's a good thing, I guess? In total, the Power of Anime project ended up being a somewhat tragic, that perhaps unintentionally underlined the bigger market trends in the anime industry. While the project was focused on showcasing original anime, and arguing that these works have some inherent artistic value, ultimately, market-wise, the show's performance didn't match up to the heavy hitters of the time, proving that it's actually just more profitable to stick with the low-risk light novel adaptations. In fact, there's a very persistent internet rumor that because of the lack of interest in Sound of the Sky at the time of airing, even the official figures ended up being cancelled, as a middle finger for all the 2 people who actually enjoyed the project at the time. There's also an interview that claims there were 4 anime in the project, but as far as I can tell, that isn't actually true, and Koichiro Natsumi is just having a laugh at your expense. He also claims that Sound of the Sky indirectly influenced titles such as Madoka Magica, which, I don't know, is at least an interesting corporate perspective. But, putting all that aside now, we're not here to talk about depressing market realities, but these, K-on characters. Now, after speaking about the setting, let's actually focus on some of the underlying theme work the anime presents. As we briefly covered in the beginning, Sound of the Sky is a wild mix of various elements, which in a normal script would mean that the series is all over the place, but in my opinion, the anime rises above all this by presenting 2 points of introspection that really work to anchor the rest of the hyperactive mess. These points are existential undertones, which present itself mostly as commentary on nihilism and vague anxieties over the future, and music being pretty okay, which is to say, there are several elements in human culture, such as music and various forms of storytelling, that have seemingly universal power to connect people. These points become meaningful in the series when the setting of the anime is in hindsight some pretty abject existential terror, as the possible death of entire humanity, and perhaps life on Earth, looms just over the horizon. So what, ultimately, is the point in fighting over a world that doesn't have a happy ending in store for us anyway? This is tied to character level by the cast struggling to find meaning and purpose in their lives, against the seemingly oppressive fates. Throughout the series we see that most of the people were introduced to have all their own answers and methods of coping against this seemingly unsolvable question. And this is interesting because, especially our main character, and her somewhat simplistic goal of just learning how to play the goddamn trumpet, in the middle of all this mess, can be read as an attempt to gap this existential void by just essentially playing Amazing Grace really hard. Whether she considers this meaningful, or answer to anything at all, even on a personal level, is up to arguments, but we're showcased that through various forms of culture, we can overcome some very human issues and superficial differences, in what essentially solidifies the show's central message as a sweet appraisal of humanity, and the strength to fight for what you personally value, over corrosion and death, whether that presents itself as post-apocalyptic hellscape, or forms of ultimately meaningless violence. Life might not have an objective meaning, and we might not have a happy ending at all, but at least we can choose our own values, whether that manifests as playing trumpets, or being hyper-fixated over this stupid anime. The series is often, kind of jokingly, compared to Haibane Renmei, and while this might serve to prompt various amount of seething in the most hardcore Haibane heads, the comparison is interesting, if only because both the series are extremely focused on the cast fighting for a meaning in a world that's, seemingly, devoid of any, and the extremely humane presentation makes these issues feel relatable and personal. An indicator of how subtle and well-written the anime can be at times, is how when giving the series a second go, you tend to notice that, for example, pretty much all the even somewhat innocent-sounding dialogue serves to foreshadow some future content, whether it's the underlying messages, or a setup for various character beats. Another way to put all this would be to say that everything just clicks, and it's a testament to how much love was put into making the world and characters feel meaningful, presented in such a natural way that it's a rare feat for anime, and in my opinion itself enough to elevate the series as something that's worth a rewatch or two. Another neat detail. The anime serves as a case study for some pretty interesting methods of world building. Even though the series isn't structured as any orthodox mystery, the way it presents its story elements mixed with an exemplary strong visual language was enough to create a lot of speculation on various aspects of the setting. My take on all this would be that it's precisely the attention to detail and the design elements that makes the series so immersive that it really seems like a fleshed-out world you can freely subject to analysis. But here's the twist. When you zoom close enough, you start to notice how little sense these seemingly cohesive details make on their own. And I'm not only talking about tanks that have legs. You just need to roll with that if you're into anime in general. But let's take for example the location, which at first glance seems to take place in post-apocalyptic Spain, for understandable reasons, but later on, we're revealed, judging from a world map they use, that the series actually takes place in Japan. So the only logical conclusion is that after the apocalypse, on the future Earth, the French, they speak French, migrated to Japan, and built a replica of a random Spanish town. Which, you know, ends up being a real head-scratcher when you think about it. It's no accident that one of the show's oldest memes showcases how the entire mess is actually a mix of various, seemingly non-related cultural elements, from German uniforms to African owls. Now, if this sounds like I'm bad-mouthing the world building, you need to stick with me here, as the anime is a case example of authenticity over, I don't know, accuracy? We of course know that the real explanations to all lore inconsistencies is just that tanks with legs are cool, and carbon coating, or whatever, but the staff was so competent in their design language that there's, like, unarguable feeling of witnessing something real. Like this world could really exist somewhere, and it has texture, and history, and colored tiles on bathroom walls, and an internal logic it operates on. And that's a rambling way of saying that these elements hit just right. Maybe the staff managed to reach some highly sophisticated Japanese viewpoint to various European cultures, and strip them to basic cohesive elements. So as a result you have a setting, that in its low-tech post-apocalyptic style feels almost nostalgic and reminiscent of something, but nothing that has ever really existed, as this culture itself has never been real, and will never exist in the future either. At least here's hoping. So that's all to say. The series does have really interesting world building, where instead of strict realism, you have a collection of details that serve to create something that's, at least to me, really special. And you're absolutely free to speculate all the nitpicky lore details. Let's switch gears and slide into that heavy spoiler zone now. And we're going to do that by criticizing the series for what is, arguably, a pretty wild pacing. For a normal anime, criticizing pacing is a catch-all term for the internet critics to vaguely point at segments they didn't find interesting enough for more or less arbitrary reasons. But for Sora no Woto, criticizing the pacing means pointing out that the series introduces its main antagonist while there's just 2 episodes left, and he's, like, basically just this very evil dude. I've seen some people in the internet defend the antagonist and his motivations, but mounting a credible pitch for Colonel Hopkins is like saying that this funny mustache dude had something going on because he liked dogs. To put this in a way that makes more sense, the dramatic structure of the series looks really strange, as it ends up being so end-heavy. And I think this is also one of the most common pieces of criticism that the series receives. It's all very understandable in hindsight, especially when you have a lot of episodes that realistically seem to have absolutely nothing to do with the main plotline. And as a bonus, whenever you happen to have an actual serious episode, dealing with war traumas or whatever the flavor of the episode actually is, the somber mood is broken by the ending theme, which is so upbeat that it feels like watching chipmunks on crack. I guess you could make the perfectly valid argument that even these random episodes do try and build some characterization, but even then, I think it's perfectly reasonable to ask if it's really necessary to spend an entire episode building characterization for this random, orphan kid, and the sad backstory she has with her mother's secret lockbox and hair, and my answer to that would be, of course, yes. It absolutely is necessary. And I wouldn't change, for example, the part where the protagonist just tries to hold in her pee for an entire episode for literally any logical or consistent reason, no matter what the internet critics claim, even if it means I'd have saved the time it took to draw this bad chart. Like, a minute and a half of my life that I'll never get back. You see, at some point you'll come to realize that the main goal here probably isn't to drive a super coherent narrative, which, let's be real, regardless exists there in the series, just strangely paced. But the entirety of the story exists just to offer a quick snapshots into the lives of these characters. It just happens that some of them deal with war and politics, but that's not, by far, what the series is all about, or what it chooses to spend its time on. And this type of a presentation is extremely charming, as when viewed as a character-driven narrative, the things some people might call pacing issues or inconsistencies start to appear like a scrapbook of all kinds of personal memories, all serving to create unique world and characterization. And hey, if you think I'm just coping with the pacing being bad here, there's, for example, commentary by the director himself, who instead of lamenting that he didn't have enough time to build on the political setting, turns out to be sad over how he didn't have more time to showcase what essentially just amounts to random stuff, like this absolute side character just looking dapper while on a military leave, which, I probably don't have to stress, wouldn't have improved the structure of the series in any meaningful way. But that's not the point. And you shouldn't complain about this either. You should strive to be more like the director, and celebrate that instead of a structurally sound series, you now have an OVA that decides to expand on the cast getting absolutely hammered. Of course, the undertone here and in the director's laments is that in an ideal world, Sora no Woto would have been given enough time, and enough popularity, to warrant a longer run, which would, maybe, have addressed some of the criticism the series receives for its pacing. So after the series being, essentially, cut short, with the creators having so many more stories to tell, and the anime being, even admittedly by the creators themselves, a commercial flop, the ultimate fate of the series seems to be to fade into obscurity. Unless, of course, there's some kind billionaire or an oil baron that decides to fund a new season out of his own pockets, which is not what I'd call likely, but hey, if you happen to be rolling in cash, you know what to do now. In a way, for how full of life and hopes for the future the series is, maybe, in the end, it ultimately lost to this corrosion, in a real world that truly has no happy endings to speak of. There's also a visual novel, but I don't know if I want to talk about that. Alright, let's talk about the novel. it's kinda bad. While the novel is nominally a sequel, the themes we previously discussed have now been switched, with the characters being very gay, the homosexual undertones now being just blatant overtones, and there's a new character that doesn't seem to be designed by the same people at all, so she has, like, this monocle thing on her head, or whatever. I probably didn't mention it yet, but the original character design was made by Mel Kishida, who made, no way around it, absolutely stunning artworks of the cast. The pieces have this almost ephemeral quality, that by all practical means would probably have been impossible to recreate in any animated format. Out of the Mel-influenced anime, Hanasaku Iroha probably has the most consistent quality, but I don't think it really achieves the same visual touch, despite there being obviously a large budget for an anime of its time. I mean, just look at this floor, for example. Can you claim with a straight face that thousands of Korean sweatshop children weren't employed by these few seconds? So it's understandable that Sora no Woto, as it is, decided to ditch Kishida's original style and went for being, literally just K-on. So, yeah, about that visual novel, it's essentially just character fan service, and despite there being a handful of scenes that elevate the script above just some cheap pandering, and admittedly this chibi orchestra animation being heckin' cute, it's clearly intended for the two people who are in prior obsessed with the series, which means that while I'm personally eating good, realistically, aside from the novel being fully voiced by the same actors, there's really nothing of the same quality here, on pretty much any aspect. It's a stupid fanservice game. What else did you expect? There's also the manga, which serves as a chance to relive basically the same story, with significantly downgraded visuals. I don't know why you'd want to do that, maybe just to hurt yourself. There's also the drama CD, which offers some light insights into the cast. And then, there's also this game, where you play as Noelle. But that's all. There's nothing more I want to talk about. I could have probably stretched out the video to infinity by just making a closer reading on more of my favorite aspects, or by including more location hunt anecdotes, or by analyzing the main character's bladder, which is what the series is known for and probably why you're watching this video anyway. So, feel free to treat this as a personal attack. But overall, I'm tired and out of Calvados, so just go watch the stupid anime now. You'll probably find something that resonates with you, mixed in there somewhere. So at the end of the day, what, even, were the sounds of the skies? At least, I can state conclusively, that we're looking at nothing else but the most realistic military anime ever made. Only a handful of shows manage to capture the real heart beef of serving in the military, doing mostly nothing, and making all mundane tasks, like holding in your pee, a forced adventure that probably also features some sad bureaucratic dimension, so 10 out of 10 for realism. The anime also features tanks that have legs, so 10 out of 10 for being scientifically inaccurate and really cool. There's also the fact that Kobayashi Yu's aggressive line delivery sounds like she's preparing to strangle me with her voice, so that's a 10 out of 10 for characters. Considering the pacing issues, that all rounds up to solid 7 out of 10 anime. I'm just kidding. It's pretty redundant to even try to give a number to an anime like this, outside, of course, the roundabout suggestion that it's pretty fun and you should go watch it. I'd say it's a solid 8, or 9, or 10, depending on how much you're into whatever the specific focus of the episode happens to be. So that's a 10 for you, isn't it? You dirty bastard.